Salam, everybody. Welcome to the Samawat Network. We're happy to have you all join us tonight. We've got some folks here from all over the U.S. and from Afghanistan. We wanted to have a special discussion tonight. We planned it very recently after the attacks that happened April 19th in Kabul. We have a discussion coming up on Sunday, but we felt it was really important for us to talk about what recently happened, the tragedy that happened in Kabul. So we thank everyone for joining us, and want to take some time to discuss this, and we have a couple folks here who can share some experiences from being in Kabul themselves, and other folks who are in the States right now but originally grew up in Afghanistan, who have a lot of family and relatives there. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Omar Aziz. I'm going to be moderating tonight's call, and I'm here in the Bay Area, California. And we'll go to my left, and Samira, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Samira Said Rahman. I'm living in Kabul right now, born and raised in Toronto.
And Lema?
Hi everyone, I'm Lema Murtaza. I'm currently in Kabul, Afghanistan, living and working, and I was also born and raised in California, the US.
And Isanullah?
Hi everyone, my name is Isanullah Shagiwal, and I was born in Afghanistan, raised in Pakistan in an immigrant camp, and I'm currently in Arkansas, but I study in San Francisco, so I'm here for a conference. I'm just in a hotel now.
How's Arkansas, Isanullah?
It's different. It's different than Bay Area.
You've increased our viewership in Arkansas by at least 100%. Thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure to be here. My pleasure.
All right. And Abdul Jan?
Salam everyone, my name is Abdul Ghafar Kakar, and I'm studying at Duke University. I'm doing my master's here, and I was born in Kabul, but then spent some time in Pakistan. Came back to Afghanistan, and then it's been only a year that I'm here, and I'm really happy to be here among you all.
And Ali? Ali, you there?
Yeah, sorry, I just figured out how to unmute it. Sorry, I'm doing this on my phone. I'm Ali. I'm currently the Los Angeles Times reporter in Kabul. I was born in Kabul, and I grew up in California. And then I moved back to Kabul in 2013.
And Ali, if you can just kind of get us started a little bit, and I know you just recently wrote an article about what happened. So if you could just kind of give us an overview of what occurred on that day.
Sure.
Just kind of report back to us.
Sure. So basically, it was on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Everyone in the city, all throughout the city, heard a huge blast. It was a huge blast, and it came from a truck bomb. There was a truck that was parked near basically the Riyasat-e-Dah, which is like the 10th Directorate. It used to belong to the Afghan Intelligence Agency. Now it's a spin-off that sort of is affiliated with the presidential palace, and it's basically in charge of providing security to high-level officials. Now, this is the excuse that the Taliban will give. This is who they will say that they targeted, and they did kill some security officials within the building and outside it. I believe it was about 30, but the majority of the deaths and the injuries were civilians, because this is an area of Kabul and Pul Mahmud Khan, which is basically, there are stores there, there are warehouses there, there are cars that can take you to Torkham and to Lugar and to other places there. And so since it was at 9 a.m. in the morning, that's when people are basically heading off to work and school and all of this. So it was a highly trafficked area. So it was very similar to a bombing last summer in the Shah Shahid neighborhood, which basically we saw had huge civilian casualty tolls. I mean, in this case, we had 64 dead and 347 injured, the majority of which were civilians. And again, it's because it's a highly trafficked area that's completely busy, especially at that time.
And thanks for kind of giving us an overview of that. And if there's more, people want more info, there's also an article that Ali wrote and that we posted on the Facebook page. And for anyone who wants to chime in, ask any questions or commentary as we're having our discussion, please feel free to comment on the Facebook event page, and we'll do our best to get to some of your questions. But I did want to ask for those of you, the rest of y'all, like, where were you when you heard about this? And just like, what crossed your mind when you heard about what happened, or when you heard about it, or when you saw it? Abdul-John, do you mind starting with that for us? I'm gonna click to you and just start with you.
Sure, Umarjan. I was actually, since I was working on one of my assignments here. It's the end of my second semester, so I was awake, and since it happened early in the morning, I got the news around 2 o'clock, and the first thing that hit me, I wanted to find out where it happened, because I'm also a native to Kabul, and most of my family members are living there. So I wanted to see where the vicinity is, and then when I found out that it's been around the Mahmud Khan area, that's where I used to commute. That's where my family commutes if they want to come to the city, since they're living in Arzan Qimat, and that's the commute area. And so a lot of my family members, my very close friends, that's the route they use. So then I was like, okay, so do I continue with my assignment, or do I just start calling from A to Z? How are you, and what's up with you? So it was really difficult, but then I had to decide to just continue with my my assignment and then get done with it and just sleep over it, because there's nothing much I can do. But then with the passage of time, when I started seeing a lot of posts coming from friends, when I saw how big it was really difficult to sleep, because it kept coming that maybe there are some friends who have been injured.
And Lema, what was it like for you being in Kabul when you on that day?
So my story is, so I was in the car going to work, and the driver was playing really loud Afghan folk music. So it was a very lively atmosphere in the car. So we couldn't really hear anything on the outside, and especially with where we were, the roads are not very smooth. So if it's like a little rocky, the whole car is shaking. But when I got to the office, it was eerily quiet. There was almost this like the atmosphere was very dark and gloomy. We also knew that because it started raining heavily this day as well, which is almost happened. And also in my office, there's a generator to the right of me, so I wasn't able to hear anything. But right when I got to my computer, I started also getting calls. Ali called me, all my friends called me, and then I was like, what the hell's going on? And I hear about the attack. People are coming in my office, and they're asking me, like, are your friends okay? Are your family okay? And then just like John, I went through my phone list, calling all my friends, making sure everyone's okay. And that's what everyone else was doing in the office as well. I followed the flow of what Afghans were doing, which was, one, calling all their friends and family to make sure everyone's okay, and then it quickly went to getting back to work if their family members were, in a safe space. I think the moment that it really affected me was when I started hearing the ambulance sirens in the background, and then I was like, the magnitude showed itself to be a lot stronger than what I thought it was, and so that's when I was getting a little uneasy, more in an emotional aspect than anything else. Yeah, that was my experience.
John, do you mind sharing what it was like for you when you first heard about what happened and what crossed your mind?
Yeah, for me it was similar to Abdul. So my family live in Kabul. My brother works in the city, so he has to commute the same route where the incident happened. So when I heard about this incident, the first thing that came into my mind was my brother. So I try to call him, and I don't know what happens with the network when such incident happens, but it doesn't work well. So I tried to call him, and it wasn't working. So finally, I succeeded to call him, and I talked to him, and he was luckily okay in his office, but his office was locked down, and everybody was in a safe room. In a safe room. So he worked in an area which is just like less than I could say maybe 500 meters or something. So they heard like a big explosion, and so that was like a terrible experience for him. And when I was talking with him, I could feel like what's going on through him and his colleagues. So that was a bad day, and after that, then I tried to call my other friends and my colleagues that I used to work with in Kabul, who also use the same route and the same road to commute to the office. And luckily, my friends were okay and they were good. My family also live in Karte now, which is close to Arzan Khimat, where Abdul's family is living. So that was a bad day for me, and I had a presentation after that, and that was a final presentation of my final project. So that day didn't go well for me at all. That was a bad experience, a bad day.
Thank you for sharing that. And what's it, Samira? I know you haven't had a chance to share, but what's it like for you? Kind of, you went to Kabul recently, and so like, what's that been like for you? Kind of being there and experiencing something like this.
Well, I think just starting my 6th month in Kabul. But for me, I don't know, I wasn't really, we've been having a lot of earthquakes recently. So where I am, I'm quite a distance away from where the attack actually took place. And when it happened, I just assumed it was another earthquake because our building started shaking. And then I think it was a few seconds later, that's when the sound came. So it was first the initial impact of the ground shaking, and then the sound came afterwards. I still assumed it was an earthquake. I thought something else had crashed around somewhere. When I went out of my apartment, I was going to work late that day. I realized a lot of people were standing in the hallways looking towards the airport. I live right next to the airport, and everyone said, you know, there's been an attack outside the airport. So it was quite loud. If you know the layout of Kabul, the airport is quite a distance away from Pul Mahmud Khan. And even then, we still felt the impact quite heavily down here. So it was an interesting experience. I think that was the loudest attack that I have heard in my time here. There are ones that have taken place closer to me, but didn't feel nearly as strong as this one did. And that sort of showcases how strong the actual attack was. And like Laima and Ali, I think we all just started calling people the minute we heard it was an attack. I think Laima messaged me right away. That was one of the first people who messaged me. And then I just started calling all my cousins because they all travel down that route. There's people who live who work within short distances of that area. And then I ended up going into the office about an hour after that, and we have the emergency hospital located right behind my office. And I think for the next 4 or 5 hours, we heard continuous sirens as they were bringing in victims, and then the street was backed up with people waiting in line to donate blood. So it was an interesting experience, to say the least. And
Ali, if you could talk a little bit about what folks are saying about this attack, and who's claimed responsibility, and like, you know, any like sort of like reasoning behind it that you might be able to share that you've been hearing or reporting on.
Okay, sure. So basically, the Taliban claimed responsibility pretty early on. They said that they targeted the Riyasat and they claim that they killed, you know, they say we didn't kill any civilians because they say the area, because it is close enough to the presidential palace, they use the excuse of saying, well, it's a highly guarded area and civilians can't go there. But as Samira and everyone else was saying, that's not true. You know, that's where people commute from Arzan Qimat and other places. That's where people take cars to go to other provinces. their stores and warehouses and all of these things in that area. So there definitely were civilians killed and injured. And as far as the reaction goes, most of the there's a lot of light. Most of the reaction is that how could a truck full of explosives get through every single checkpoint in Kabul? Because if you've been to Kabul, you see that there's the police ring of steel, which is basically a series of checkpoints that, suspicious cars get stopped along the way and searched or asked questions or whatever. And I mean, to tell you the truth, it doesn't really work. It's a lot of just dilkhushi. It's there to make you feel safe. But at the end of the day, there was the question of, there was a truck full of explosives that was parked near the presidential palace and the Ministry of Defense in a highly trafficked civilian area, and no one asked any questions. And I think this is sort of, because like I said earlier, it comes only a few months. I mean, that attack that I was talking about in Shah Shahid was in August, and that one also had more than 200 people injured, and a couple dozen killed. I don't remember the exact kill rate, but it was more than 250 people injured. And that was at 1 o'clock at night. So again, it's this question of, how do these giant load-bearing trucks full of explosives keep getting into the city? And that's been sort of the main question people are asking. And then Samira pointed to the other reaction, which is, I passed by the emergency hospital later that day too, and it was the same situation. There were people lining up to donate blood, and that was across several hospitals. I read online that in Parwan province in the north, there were people lining up to give blood. So that was really the reaction. The reaction was, okay, we're going to do something good for our people, but there was also just this question of, why is this still going on? Why is this still the security situation?
And Ihsanullah John and Abdul John, for you two, I mean, you grew up nearby, either grew up in or near Afghanistan growing up, and so what was that like for you all when I'm sure this isn't the first attack, this isn't the first tragedy that's happened, in Afghanistan and Kabul and those areas. So I mean, I just would love to know just a little bit more about what it's like for you when you hear about these things. Does it become in some ways normal? Like, it happens so often. For us, it seems like it happens often, but I would love to just kind of hear from your perspective, growing up nearby Afghanistan. So Abdul John, if you want to get us started.
Well, Marjan, the thing is, I have the 8 years that I was in Kabul and working with Ministry of Finance and then working for the Equal Access Afghanistan. Both these offices, the commute that I was taking, the way, like, I would say I have survived around 5 or 6 suicide attacks that were like only, I would say, 40 meters away from me. So although it's kind of like when it happens over and over again, and then you see blood for consecutive times, and you see a lot of human beings losing their life, and especially when you see your very close relatives dying, and it kind of becomes like, this is what I always tell my friends, that I feel like dying and getting injured by these suicide attacks and natural disasters or other things for Afghan, I feel like Afghans, it's something like Afghans do on a daily basis, just like drinking and eating and all that. So although it's that, but I don't know what's so special about this event. I was kind of hoping that things are getting better, and with these peace talks going on, I thought there is a new phase to all this. But then when the attack happened with such a big number of casualties, it kind of took me back to like even thinking that things are even worse than before. I don't know where this hope came from. We haven't seen some good days. Things are still worse in Afghanistan. But for some reason, I was kind of hopeful that maybe with these peace talks going on, we'll go somewhere. And it really hit me hard. Like compared to the other ones that happened throughout the year, maybe because also the winter is over and now they are starting their summer attacks. Maybe it was one of their biggest. Maybe that's they want to give it a pace to. So for me, it was huge. I I think I have lost all the hope that I had gained during this winter, that maybe there's going to be peace talks and that we'll find a way, an end to all this. I just lost it again.
Sanalajan, just wondering if you had anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, for me, since I was working with the USAID and other developmental projects in Afghanistan, and I've been managing the human resources functions of these projects. So part of my responsibility was to make sure that staffs are fine, specifically when it was like the time for commute to go home or come to the office. So I had to work with my staff, with my team, and call each and every employee to make sure that they are safe. On general basis, it's like it was like a normal thing. So when I was leaving home, I would always look back to my parents and my siblings, my brothers and sisters, and honestly, I mean, every day you feel like whether we'll be back or not. You don't know like what's going to happen to you when you are commuting to the office, because that was something like you don't know when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen to you. So the fear and the fear is always with you, and the fear is always with your family when you are working in such a situation. But then, I mean, you have no other option, so you have to live with it, and you have to accept this, and you have to deal with these challenges and these things. But it gives like a lot depression, a lot hopelessness, like you don't have a hope and you don't know what's going to happen because nothing is in your hand. You don't know. I mean, you can focus on your future, you can focus on anything. Even if you're in work, you don't know where your brother is, how he's I mean, what's going to happen to him, and so on. And mostly when I would call my brother and my sisters when they were commuting to their schools, universities, and to their offices to make sure that they are safe, not only because of such incidents, but so many other things that's like a normal thing in Kabul and in Jalalabad and other provinces. So it's not an easy life. It's full of challenges. It's full of difficulties and full of so many things that cannot even be expressed. I mean, you cannot express it, those feelings. So yeah.
Go ahead, Abdul-Jan.
I just wanted to add one thing, that I remember when I used to work at these agencies, and when I used to leave home, my mom will, like, I'm the only kid of the family. I don't have any brothers and sisters. And so every time I would leave the house, she will like stare at me, and then like this was like what she always asked, like, son, can you just, like, have something, a business, like in this village, and just do it here and not go to an office, to the city. I don't want you to go to the city. But then I'll tell her, no, mom, I mean, there's the career. I've already launched a project. I was working on the Sesame Street project. We were translating it from English to Pashto in Dari. So I was like, I've started this thing, and these actors know me and all this, and I have to be there. So she'll just look at me, okay, son, go. So I'll go, and then throughout the day, if something happens, I'll receive like around 13 to 17 to 18 missed calls from family. And because like I was keeping my phone silent during the office hours, then I'll realize it maybe either during the lunch or after the lunch. Then I'll call them like, okay, what's going on? Why are you calling? So they're like, oh, nothing. I just thought maybe something would have happened and it didn't make it to the news. But I'm like, no, if anything happens, it will be on the news, and don't call me, don't worry. But again, still, when I'll go back home and I show up, like I knock on the door, then that's like I'll see like my mom didn't expect me to come back. She'll just look at me, and then she's like, oh, you came back. So uh, that throughout the day, that whole 8 to 9 to 10 hours were spent. She spent all those hours thinking that her son won't return, and then after that, when I was home, she couldn't enjoy me being there because she knew that I was leaving tomorrow. So that's pretty much how days and nights are. And I maybe us, because we see these, we see all this happening, we see bodies chopped off, we see all these crazy things happening. It, as I said, I have survived 5 or 6 of them, so you can see how much terror I have seen. Maybe it was normal for me. I was like, why is my mom worried? But she, as a mother, I could never understand her feelings, and so I know she never enjoyed life while I was working.
And thank you both for sharing that. I think both of you talked a little bit about, after these things happen, just kind of moving on with life. And I know, as normal as you can possibly. And one of the things that's always struck me is the resilience of our people, and how they move on and how they continue life as normal. As normal as they can after these things happen. How is that possible? Like how are Afghana capable of doing this? And what have you seen in terms of like that resilience and right after these things happen? Lema, were you gonna talk?
Yeah, there were two things. One, following up with Ghafar, is that this idea of this hopelessness, and there's this idea of always being worried that one of your family members are hurting or going to get hurt or are going to be in the line of danger every single day is kind of what pushes people to leave. I mean, if people have the option to leave, they will leave. Because it's the psychology of war that also hurts more than the reality of war. And the second part of that, going into the question that you're asking, this resilience, is part of it is, yes, people have endured more than 40 years of war now, so this is their only option, right? But the second part of it is they're still human beings like everyone else in the world, and you will see that resilience through the article that I posted, that so many people came to give blood right away after the attack, right when they heard. People were being pushed away to say, you know what, we don't have the capacity to take any more blood, thank you so much. But this shows like this, people still have humanity, and it's just like anywhere else in the world. So those are 2 points that I want to make, that this psychology it impacts a lot of what's going to happen, how people react, and how they will continue to be resilient in the face of war.
And Lema, you talked a little bit about how people are leaving and leaving the country. Ali, I know you wrote a little bit about like a campaign on keeping people, trying to keep people from leaving Afghanistan. And I know you've also worked outside with refugees in like Europe. So if you want to just talk a little bit about that and what that's been like.
About the refugees?
Yeah, so there's been this like campaign to keep. I've just been reading on this campaign to like keep Afghans within the country.
That Afghanistan needs you.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, there's this like they don't understand why some people say that Afghans aren't considered refugees, or they're not being let into certain countries in Europe because of being claimed as economic migrants. So if you could kind of talk a little bit about that.
So I mean, the idea of, I think it's a nice idea, and it's a nice campaign, but we kind of have to look at who's behind it. What kind of people, what kind of access they have to things, what kind of life they lead, where they're living. This sort of changes the idea. Yeah, it's a nice idea. Afghanistan needs you. Of course, Afghanistan needs you, but you also need to live, and you also need to live in an environment where you feel like, because the thing is, when you talk to refugees in Greece, in Turkey, in Italy, in any of these places that I've been, what they say is there's no future for us, right? Like there's no future in Afghanistan. As much as the president says your future is in Afghanistan, well, we just saw on, it's funny, I was just at, I shouldn't say which, but I was at a European embassy yesterday, and they were asking me about these things, and I was like, okay, just, at that point, it was one day ago. I was like, just one day ago, you saw at 9 o'clock in the morning people coming, like they were saying earlier, coming from Azan Qimat, or trying to head toward Ham, or just, you know, exchanging money or going to school or whatever. You know, they were injured. 347 people were injured. 64 were killed. You know, simply because they went outside. And this is the reality of the situation in Kabul, which is the capital, which in theory is supposed to be the safest place. You know, and considering that location in Pul Mahmud Khan was near the ARG, the presidential palace, was near the Ministry of Defense. You know, it's no wonder these are the kinds of reasons that people are leaving. As much as they say, oh, Afghan are economic migrants, that's not true. You know, the truth is that people feel they have no future, no security future for sure, because as we were saying, okay, in Kabul, you literally cannot, you know, any one of us could have been in that area that day. This is the thing people talk about, you know, resilience or things like that. Well, you have no choice, right? You just have to go on with your life. And a lot of times the thinking is, okay, well, this happened in the west side and I was on the other side of town, or I was on the west side and it happened on the other side of town, or it happened in Jalalabad and I was in Kabul, or whatever. You know, that's how you keep rationalizing it and thinking about it. But the reality is, tomorrow you could be there. You know, tomorrow you could be on your way to work, you could be catching a car somewhere, and this attack could happen. And this is why people feel the need to leave. Now, this idea of economic migrant comes from a lot of people, because you have to remember, the people in the poorest areas, in the poorest villages, in the poorest districts will never get a chance to leave. The people who get a chance to leave are people who have access to debt. So people who would have access to debt, right? Meaning that they are either in a city, so Kabul, Jalalabad, Mazar, Herat, Kandahar, or they are in a district close enough to a city where they can basically take out a debt from a Saraf, and you know they're basically tying their family to this debt to try and go. But the root of it is still this idea that I have no future. You know, the fundamental, most basic part of the future is I could have been in Pul Mahmud Khan. Any one of us could have been in Pul Mahmud Khan that day at 9 a.m. It was very likely that we could have been. And thank God we weren't at that moment, but we could have been. And then, yes, there is a part of, okay, there are no jobs, there is no economy, I can't provide a life for my children and my family. But more than anything, it's this idea of, I feel I have no future, and I feel I have no security, and I'm constantly worried. Like everyone was saying, their parents are always worried. Everyone's calling everyone, are you alive? What happened? You know, this is a constant state.
And Lema, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, piggybacking on what Ali John is saying is that I want to make a very clear point that Kabul is not only Afghanistan, and we fall into that trap because the media constantly portrays more of the metropolitan cities. Every day something is happening in Baharak, in Badakhshan, or in Kunduz, or Ghor, or somewhere else in the country that they don't get media time on. I think it's unfair, but at the same time, I understand, because we also there's a lack of capacity and lack of resources there, and also there's not enough interest in those regions, which is, again, very unfair. And I think we don't show any focus on that. We kind of paint these brush strokes so that they're in the village, these things happen, and that's not true. They all have lives, and it's from these villages that people are leaving. Even in my time in Greece, there were not a lot of people from Kabul. It probably made up 10% of the people fleeing from the time I was there. So the reality is that the rest of the country is also hurting and bleeding, and we should pay attention to that as well. Kabul is where most of the foreign expats are. So we put a lot of focus on that too, right? So I wanted to make sure that we brought that up and remind ourselves that Kabul is not only Afghanistan. We have 30 other plus provinces to also consider and take care of.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I have is, is there a difference in the reactions and the responses when it's like a NATO or U.S. civilian casualty bombing versus something like this that happened with the Taliban, and how is that different? What's the how are the reactions and the responses to that different?
So you mean if basically like NATO attacks and then they kill civilians, or if NATO people are killed?
Either, yeah, both.
Okay, so if NATO attacks and they kill civilians, there's often excuses. I mean, the best example is airstrikes and drone strikes, right? There's always reports of, and it's always limited to this. They'll be like, and unfortunately, like Nangarhar right now is the most victim to it. There's always a report of 40 quote-unquote militants, 60 quote-unquote militants, 20 militants, or Taliban, or Daesh, or now they're even saying Al-Qaeda are being killed in these airstrikes and these drone strikes, and there's no proof of that. There's no proof, because as long as you say that they are quote-unquote militants, it gets brushed under the carpet. No one goes back to ask who actually got killed. And this is a big deal. And you find, you even find Afghanis saying, oh, well, that's okay. They supported the Taliban, or they were Taliban, or, they shouldn't have been in that area, or whatever, trying to rationalize it. And then the Western media does nothing about it, asks no questions about it. I mean, there was the rare exception of I believe it was 3 drone strikes over about a day and a half in Paktika province about a month ago that the New York Times investigated. It was, depending on different accounts, between 17 and 20 people killed. The government officials and NATO all said, oh, they were, like, some said they were this was the thing, is like the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior couldn't decide. One said it was Taliban, the other said it was Al-Qaeda. But then the people of Paktika, of that area, of that village, said, no, these were civilians. These were civilians. Not only were they civilians that hated the Taliban and were afraid of the Taliban. So this happens all the time. And then in the case of where, let's say, so there's two instances of this. So like, let's say like a NATO soldier, like a U.S. soldier or something, gets killed. That takes precedence. That will take precedence in media coverage. And then if foreign civilians get killed, that completely takes precedence. We've seen this time and time again. There will be an attack where foreign civilians are killed, and they get long biographies and detailed accounts of what their lives were like, and after or later. And I remember the first time we really thought about this was after the Kandahar massacre in 2011, where my coworker at the time, Mujib Mashal at Al Jazeera, who now works for the New York Times, he made a really good point. He's like, we don't know the victims' names. We don't know these villagers' names, and no one asked. So some of the Al Jazeera staff went and asked, and Al Jazeera became the first publication to publish all of their names, because it didn't even occur to us. We just thought about it, and then Mujib just thought about it, and he was like, well, why don't we ask? And they asked, and they published it. So these things are very important, and we see that there's a complete double standard around it.
Lema, go for it.
Quick comment. I think that a short answer to mirror what Ali's saying is that the common Afghan on the street, the common fruit seller, Mewa Faroshi, will know the difference between a NATO airstrike, U.S. strike, or if it's the Taliban. There's a very, I think, clear picture of who's who, and you can tell sometimes just because of the weapons that they use, or the type of a way that they conduct their attack. And I think there's a very clear distinction on who's who and what's doing what and for what intention. That the common Afghan knows that someone outside of the country wouldn't know, just because they're that in tune with politics and what's happening in Afghanistan.
Go ahead, Samira.
Yeah, just to build off on what Lema and Ali were saying, it's also, this idea again of privileging of the urban areas over the rural areas. I mean, most of NATO's attacks or drone strikes or whatever sort of missions they have tend to be in the rural areas. You're not going to see a large-scale NATO attack in the center of Kabul, for example. And that plays a role in how these incidents are viewed. Again, Kabul is, like Lema was saying, a lot of people just conflate the two. Kabul is Afghanistan to many people, and that's the way the media tends to cover it, and that's the way the people tend to talk about it as well. And again, the reactions to events that take place in the rural areas, it's just, there's this level of disconnect between these cities and the villages. You've got folks, you keep hearing, drone strikes in Nahar, you keep hearing about the rise of the Taliban in Kunduz, the fact that they're getting closer and closer to taking over the city again. But again, it's not really talked about to the extent of when, for example, an attack takes place in Kabul. And even the numbers of civilian casualties, I mean, you've got statistics coming in saying something like 60, 70, up to 100 people are dying in Kunduz every day in the fighting. And then you'll have a suicide attack in Kabul that will kill around 5 people, but that will get more media coverage than, the ongoing battles in Kunduz.
And go ahead, Abdul.
Well, I just wanted to talk about the Afghans' reaction on these incidents. I think people have, their reactions have changed a lot over this past 2 years, because previously Taliban were hiding behind the cause and the reasons that they were giving, that, because there are foreign troops and all these people around, that's why we are continuing with these attacks, and that's the reason. So now that they are gone, and pretty much all these responsibilities of the security of Afghans is given to the Afghan national forces and the Afghan police, and they're still continuing with all this, the reaction has changed. I see a very big change in it. And the reason that one of the things that Samira Jan mentioned, that I saw a lot of people standing in front of the emergency hospital and all these other places coming to donating blood to, although they knew that most of the victims were personnel of the Afghan intelligence, and still people are coming over and they want to I can see Samira nodding, not agreeing with it. Well, what I'm saying, actually, it was, although there were civilian casualties, but the primary target was the military compound that they attacked. So what I'm saying, still people showing up and then showing up for giving blood and all that, it's kind of showing that there is a change in the behavior of Afghans. And then the way they actually condemn it, if you see the videos that came out, although they've been in the previously similar reactions, but now they have taken it to another level, because now they're challenging Taliban, saying that even now that the foreigners are gone and you're still you're attacking with such severe attacks, that's proving something different.
And go ahead, Isam.
So yeah, there's quite a difference between the media coverage in urban areas and rural areas. And people in the rural areas are the victims a lot. I mean, they have been killed in the attacks from Taliban, from the Afghan National Army and police, or the war between them, or in the drones attacks and those things. But the thing is, they are not on media. They are not covered on specifically on televisions and those type of media. So if you talk to a person from a rural area, like let's say a far village of Jalalabad, and if you ask a random person, that person will tell you that they lost at least 1 or 2 or 3 family members, either from for either killed by the, I mean, in the war between Afghan National Army and Taliban or other insurgents, or by the Taliban. So they're kind of feeling like, okay, we are being killed here. They don't have any hope, and they're just leaving with it. They don't know what to do with it. They don't have that much education, and they don't have that much money and economy to just go to a nearby city. Like, those people are just living their life with. I mean, I know people who are who live their life just with a cow, or with something, with something like very basic. They don't have even they don't have like meat the whole month, so they live their life like the whole month with probably with less than $100, or even less than that. Like the whole family. I'm not talking about one person. Like the whole family with $100 or less than that. So those kind of people do not find their ways to go either to Kabul or live there because of the high rent and those problems. So they have to be there, and they have to just live with it. And that's the part of it. And yeah, the media probably, because of the security reasons, they cannot travel there. They cannot cover those areas. But sometimes if you have a friend there, and those people, I mean, those people do not have access to Facebook, and they don't have access to internet. Most of them are not educated, so you don't hear a lot about them. But in Kabul, of course, you have educated people. In Jarabat, you have educated people. Although big cities, we hear at least on media and such things. But those people are the people who are like in far villages. Their situation is worse than those people who are in urban areas or big cities.
And so we talked about how there's, disparities in the media coverage. Just talking a little bit about how, when it's a NATO airstrike, civilian casualties, media doesn't cover it as much. When there is international or foreign person who's killed, all of a sudden there's a lot more attention. What is the role of, like, for many people who might be outside of Afghanistan, social media? Like, is it helpful to, what is the role of social media and posting things like hashtags of like pray for Kabul and things like that? Is that helpful? Can that benefit in some way? Or what are some other things that can be done to kind of counter some of that, the disparities in the media coverage? So, Samira, were you gonna chat, or we'll go to Lema first?
Sure, I can go ahead. I think one of the most important aspects of social media in like the context of Afghanistan is it allows you to get information about things that you generally wouldn't be able to over traditional media sources. I mean, if it weren't for social media, when I was living in Toronto, I wouldn't know, where the attacks took place, how many people were injured in them. I wouldn't, find that information out until a day or two after an incident took place, for example. But, on Twitter, on Facebook, etc., we were able to get that information, and then you're able to get into contact again with that same routine of getting into contact with family and friends who live in the city and checking in if they're okay. There's also the aspect of it that it allows us to try to, get a greater audience and educate more people about what it is that is happening in Afghanistan. This attack, for example, we saw wasn't covered to the extent that we would have seen other attacks of this magnitude had they taken place elsewhere in the world. Social media allowed Afghans in Afghanistan as well as abroad to start discussing, some of the concerns that we have about media portrayal, about the privileging of certain bodies over others, about the ways in which Western society and all across the world, the ways in which they react and sympathize when incidents such as this take place. Oftentimes you hear the argument that Afghanistan's so far away, and that's why the Western media doesn't cover it, or that's why, you don't have your friends on Facebook changing their profile pictures. But when the Paris attacks took place, you had Afghans in Afghanistan changing their profile pictures to the French flag. You know, you see that sort of solidarity from this end, but you rarely see it from the Western side.
Go ahead, Lema.
So I think there are a few ways in which Afghans in the diaspora can help the situation in Afghanistan. I think one is creating more linkages to Afghans in Afghanistan to figure out what's actually happening, get their opinion on their needs and assessments, figure out what the reality is on the ground, politically, physically, socially, and in other myriads of ways. And I think once that is established, instead of just listening amongst ourselves in the diaspora and really getting a clue of what's happening there, we have to create better organized and unified lobbying movements, especially within the U.S. And people think of lobbying as this really big and difficult word, but it's not. It's just as simple as organizing yourself within a group of people that are consistent with their messaging and advocacy. And I think once that happens, social media can play a role in supporting that cause and create a more powerful impact by supporting those lobbying efforts, because really social media by itself can't do anything. You can create a faux shallow movement, but you have to have policy implementation at the top. So if people who are already organized at the federal level, who work on this type of policy, are engaged with a group of organized Afghans to talk about what real needs and changes happen, this is how real change can occur. So it's fine, it's great, change your Facebook profile, but if it's not attached to something stronger, I don't necessarily see it as being impactful besides showing solidarity and support.
John, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think social media play a big role, specifically in Afghanistan. Like you have these pages and these social media pages which are run by Afghans inside Afghanistan, and they have like hundreds of thousands of followers. So, for example, you had people like lined up in a very long lines for giving their or donating their bloods and so on. So that's how people are informed, like where to go and how to help and what help can they provide and so on. Inside Afghanistan, it helps a lot. It helps people. They inform them about what happened and where it happened and so on. It has a big role. Outside of Afghanistan, it helps as well. Like we see today, we are talking about an incident. Probably it wasn't possible probably a few years back, but we have it, and that's because of the social media that connect me with you guys and so many others. So now we are talking about Afghanistan. That's where we all belong to. Yeah, it does help. It does have a good role. It does help with the information and awareness, but it's not everything. It's not enough. We need to do more. And for the diaspora and the Afghan Americans and other diasporas from around the world that may want to help, the only suggestion I could give them is find the right people and just help them through any means and any way you can. If you cannot help by money or anything, you cannot donate, just help with sharing the message. And let the world know about the realities. Let the world know about what's going on there and what's going on with those people. Because I'm talking here with so many Americans in my office, in my school, and when I talk about Afghanistan, they don't know about so many things. And I think this is one of the responsibilities for the diaspora to talk about these things with the people here. Of course, the media doesn't cover it. You can't. You don't see such things on Fox News or CNN. Of course, they don't cover it. But probably we can make we can aware the people who are around us in our offices, in in a, I mean, wherever you go in a park, or the friends you have, or the family members you have, or whoever who are not connected to Afghanistan, or the Afghans who are not connected to Afghanistan. So you can bring them together and you can talk about it. Probably, I mean, one person cannot do everything, but if they're if you are all together, like we are more people in a team, probably we can do something for the country. One person cannot do it, but if we are all together, we can do it, and that's not impossible.
Yeah, so just kind of as we wrap up in the next few minutes, just asking all of you to, yeah, what can we do for those of us who may be outside of Afghanistan, or what can we do to support our people back home? So, Abdul Jan, go ahead.
Well, I'm a graphic designer and I'm a professional photographer, so I have played my part in it. I run a Facebook page, and then I also have websites where when Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have the option of changing the colors of your profile pictures, we offer it. So I'll share the website later, but going beyond the profile pictures and what we share as photos, what I think is that those who are living outside of Afghanistan, and especially in, let's not call it the well, kind of the developed part of the world, we have the peace of mind. We have that peace of mind which you cannot find in Afghanistan. There are other problems. There are problems like Donald Trump and other things to deal with, but at the same time, you don't have that fear of suicide bomber blowing you into a million pieces. So from this side, when you have that peace of mind with you, I guess we can come up with uh, sharing messages, writing about these incidents as an Afghan, and not giving it any uh, tribal or other ethnic touch to it. What Afghans are suffering from and within Afghanistan is when such things happens, it's immediately there are some things that hit their mind, and they want to judge some people who are involved in the attacks, those who are the victims. And uh, I know some people don't want to talk about it, but this does hit, and then they go back to history. Okay, what happened? Where did it all started, and how it's happening? So from our end, because we have this peace of mind, we've been away from that discrimination and all that racial the injustice that's going on inside Afghanistan. Our role is to come up with clear minds, with clean minds, right as an Afghan for Afghanistan, and to give a message to people to be united. Think of those who are victims of these attacks, those who are suffering either in the villages or in the cities, from any tribe, any whoever is suffering throughout Afghanistan is our brother and is our sister, and we have to care for them. And then taking it from that level on to if when we become professionals and we are in offices where we have the power to change policies, that's when you keep on with the spirit, and you don't come under the influence of those who are asking you for citations and stuff that don't apply to that tribal society like Afghanistan.
So the last kind of few minutes, I want to talk about like what do people see, what do people foresee in like for the future of Afghanistan, and how can we support our people, and also like what does the future look like? So if anyone wants to jump in, Ali, I want to ask. I'll start with you. What does the future look like for Afghanistan?
The immediate future, I mean, ideally the future should look good. I think ideally we all want it to look good. I think that what's going on with the government, the lack of progress in terms of, this latest round of peace process, and the continued occupation and all of this, I think it doesn't look good. And I think that's sort of, like I was saying earlier, that's really the reality that people are facing, that's part of why people are saying, you know, I feel like I have no future, because they don't see things getting better. They don't see the government fix. I mean, we still do not have a real defense minister. We have to remember that, right? It's a country at war, and we still don't have a real minister of defense. So, you know, will they get over these sort of like political issues? You know, what's gonna happen? I mean, because the truth is, like, this occupation can't last forever. It's been 15 years. At some point, it has to come to an end. And it still hasn't, and no one has figured out how that's going to happen. And at the same time, I think the sad thing is, you know, we're 15 years into it, and we're still talking about, you know, a deteriorating security situation. We're still talking about the streets of Kabul flooding. We're still talking about natural disasters all over the country, not proper responses. We're still talking about roads that aren't paved. We're still talking about people that go to school out in the snow and in the sun, and, you know, with literally no building. And, you know, as much as we want to talk about, oh, you know, Afghanistan are corrupt and we stole so much money and all of this, we also have to look at, you know, the Western side. How much money did they actually give? How did they spend that money? What did they do in terms of corruption? What are they doing in terms of corruption? You know, I think the sad thing is we're still talking about, you know, I mean, there are still areas where people are saying, well, when are we going to get a paved road? When are we going to get a real school? And the fact that we're talking about that 15 years in, I think it's really sad. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would like for the situation to get better, but for the situation to get better, I think every single party involved needs to sort of think about what they're doing and come to real solutions.
And Abdul John, go ahead.
Umarjan and all the panelists, whatever that has happened in Afghanistan, it does give us, it does squeezes all that little amount of hope that's left in us. But I think Afghans, for all these years, what they have been through and the resilience that they have shown, the unity that they have shown when they face such situations, it's phenomenal. We as one nation, we can do anything that anybody else can. We are better than them. And with all this happening in the country, and still people like seriously, for me, I want to go back to Afghanistan. Although I'm a permanent resident, but I want to be engaged in projects that will be working with communities in Afghanistan. One thing that we are lacking in Afghanistan is we don't have the political institutions that actually are there for the people, there for themselves. And it's not one or two, it's everyone. Everyone there is working for themselves, and they don't care about those either on the village level or the city level. Actually, we had this debate the other day, and we were talking about the rural and urban life in Afghanistan. So one of my friends was telling me, he's from one of the villages. He was like, don't brag about your Kabul. I know how the living standards are there too. So to be honest, I mean, even our cities are not that much in it. If we compare it to the villages, there might be like some apartments that could be different from the villages, but overall it's the same. So we don't have the political leadership there. All we can do is to engage the communities and get the communities together to, as you mentioned, the project before, Afghanistan needs you. That's what we want. That's what we want people to understand, that no matter how crazy things looks like and how we think that it's going to be impossible, actually it's not. People have been through much more worse situations, and we can definitely do it if the diaspora from outside, they can give their contribution, be it writing about it, talking to people here about it. This is one of the big roles, as Ehsan mentioned before. Although all these things happened, and then for the past 15 years, Afghanistan has been on the headlines forever. Still, in my college here at Duke, I see people, when I talk to them, I'm an Afghan, they know nothing about me. And they actually, we had the Eid celebration, they didn't know what to wish me, how to greet me. They were just saying happy holidays. So I was like, really? The country that's been on the news for the past 15 years, you don't even know what's the biggest holiday that they celebrate? So it's our responsibility to go talk to these people, tell them if they don't know about your Eid, how will they know what do we need and what actually people are looking for when these projects pour into Afghanistan. So I think it's not late. It's not like we're not gonna quit on Afghanistan. Afghanistan, as the president said, it has been there for the 5,000 years, and it will be there for the next 5,000 years. And we can play a big role in it.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Lema, go ahead.
I think, well, one, I'd like to make note that Ali and Samira are not on the call anymore, and it's most likely due to bad internet connection. I'm in an office with a generator, so we don't have to worry about that. I think as long as personal interest takes precedent in terms of international donors and within our Afghan government structure, we will continue to see a future with a lack of capacity to form simple solutions and functions, because it's in their own best interest to continue to profit out of certain situations. I'm hopeful for changes happening across the country in terms of education, literacy, and infrastructure being built to create more market access and development throughout the regions, not necessarily Kabul, because it is semi-formed as it is. I think we can be better, and there are opportunities, and I don't doubt that we can make strides within the diaspora and within Afghanistan, but I think every day needs to be taken one day at a time, especially in our current situation, until we can see a more clear future. Afghanistan is very unique in that every day something is changing, so someone has to be on top of these changes every moment as they're moving forward. I cannot, because I grew up in the U.S., I know that I don't have the insight to be able to see what the future may look like for people who have lived there their entire lives. I'm very aware of that, and I'm very conscious of that. But I think the only people who can move Afghanistan forward, maybe with the support of the diaspora, will be Afghan themselves, who should be taking the moves to change their own country. But that's the only way that I see that real progress will happen in the future.
And Ihsanjan, we'll go ahead and wrap up with some last thoughts from you.
Okay, thank you. So I think opportunities are there, and it depends on the leadership, like how they use those opportunities and so on. So hope is there, specifically when you see people like Lema Jan, Ali Jan, and Samira Jan, that they are now there. So they left their comfortable life in the US and Toronto and these places, and went to Kabul to live without. So I think they don't have power now. Lema is on electricity generator or something. So that's what make us hopeful for future. Like such people are coming to the country and they are helping. If they cannot come, they can help, like through other means, through social media, sharing the news in such things. Coming back to the people, to the communities, to the local communities in rural areas and in urban areas, in cities. I think people are much committed to the country, but there is a lack of leadership. There's no good leadership there. So if you have a good leader, I mean, if you see the history for the past decades, everybody promised Afghanistan and the local communities and people, but nobody fulfilled their promise. So they don't trust anybody. I mean, if you ask a local person about a government official or about a president or a minister or anybody, they won't trust him. They will say they are corrupted, and the same applies to the cities as well. So people don't trust their leaders, And the day we have like good leaders and honest leaders who fulfill their promises and who gain the trust of the people and communities, that would be the day one for the change and for the big change. I'm speaking for the big change. So people will stand behind the government. People will stand behind the people who bring changes. But we need a good leadership, and and the leaders need to show that in practice, not just like speaking about it. You have to show it to the people that we do care about you and we do care about your life. So everybody can make a change, a small change. It could be in social media, it could be donating something, it could be talking to someone about it, it could be spreading the news, it could be connecting people like what you are doing now. So that's an amazing job. And I think I see hope. Hope is there, opportunities are there, and I'm hopeful for a better future, inshallah.
Thank you all for sharing that, and I think for those of you that were on this call, you all are leaders for all of us, especially who for many of us who grew up outside of Afghanistan, to see the work that you put in, coming overseas for school, and the effort and the work and the commitment and the drive that you all show and exemplify, I think is an example for all of us. I can speak for myself as someone who grew up here in the U.S. and seeing how committed you all are. For me, it's like I have no excuse, and I think for a lot of us, we do have to continue to support and think about what impacts and what support we can make within the countries that we currently live in, and then also how we can support folks back in Afghanistan. And Laima, Ali, and Samira Jan, all of you who have gone back, who went on that plane and are living in Afghanistan right now, like, are also examples of kind of like how we can make that happen. So all of you all have been leaders for all of us, and thank you all for joining us and being on this call. And I think we want to encourage everybody to continue these conversations and continue thinking about ways they can support the Afghanistan and build build as much as we can, build our communities here, build our communities back home. Feel free, for anyone who wants to continue engaging and talking and discussing on the Facebook page, you're more than welcome to do that, and we can have some of our panelists answer some questions on there as well. But please continue to talk with one another, build with one another, and thank you all for joining us on this our special kind of edition for the Samovar Network. We'll be having another call this Sunday night, so if you'd like to join us there, follow us on Facebook and you'll see more information on that. But thank you all for joining us. I'm sorry, Ali and Samira, we lost them with some internet troubles in Kabul, but thank you all, and we will see you all soon. Bakhair. Shab khush.
Thank you.